You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Roughly 1/3 of all ATMs in this country are in convenience stores, so they play an important role in how convenience stores function, and convenience stores, of course, play an important role in the ATM industry, whether it's accessing cash or financial transactions, etc. Today, we're going to have a conversation about what's going on in the ATM industry at convenience stores and what the future may hold, as the intro says, for ATMs and convenience stores. Joining me today to talk about ATMs is David Tente. He is Executive Director, USA, Canada, and Americas for ATMIA, which is the ATM Industry Association. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Glad to be here.
And one of the things I love on your bio, you are said to be the ATM industry's evangelist. So let's just start out with that big overview. Tell us about ATMs and their role in society.
Well, they've been around for quite a while now, and have garnered a pretty good spot in everybody's heart, I think, and everybody uses them. Or most people use them at some point in time. So, a couple of things in particular come to mind that ATMIA is involved in, and that people may not be aware of right now, and that is our advocacy for cash. And part of that right now is an initiative that we're referring to as universal cash deposits. And what that is all about is the ability to deposit cash in any ATM that can accept cash. And even a lot of the ATMs and convenience stores now are getting to where they can accept cash or doing recycling and other functions like that. But to accept that cash and then deposit it at any account at any bank. And we're doing that because cash is fungible. It should be pretty easy. There's been kind of a long trend in bank branch and credit union branch closings over many, many years. Number of branches actually peaked in 1984, and it's been declining ever since. So this is something that consumers are looking for the C-store operators. We think it would be great for them as well. It would hopefully attract more small businesses to come in because they're losing their points of deposit as a very important transaction from many of these financial institutions, losing that in many cases in rural areas and other underserved areas. And so I think it would be a good attraction for those small businesses and even bring in consumers who tend to deposit cash on a pretty regular basis as well. Another initiative we have is called the Next Gen ATMs, and this, when you start talking about functionality, is very important to us. Next Gen is the whole idea is to make it faster and less costly to add new types of transactions to ATMs that merchants can actually generate some revenue for. For example, one of them that's sort of out there already is emergency cash. MasterCard has a couple of options for doing this. And basically, if you've got for example, a son or daughter who's across the country going to school, and all of a sudden they run out of money, need cash right away for something, you can actually send that to them over the ATM without a card. They can go to the ATM, pull up that application, put in a PIN number, and get that cash. We're also seeing cryptocurrency coming in as another new application for a lot of owners as well. So a lot of things going on in there, and the ATM has got, we think, a pretty bright future, and the number of ATMs keep growing, and as you say, a lot of them are in those C-stores.
So one thing that this episode will be free of the phrase ATM machine, because the M in ATM is machine. So we'll just call them ATMs, as you have thus far. I want to go back to the first thing you were talking about,
Sure.
Just the idea of the importance of cash in society. And over the last couple of years, I think the pandemic, we've seen a decline, a tightening, more of a dependence for a lot of people in using debit or credit. Now, the downside of that is, of course, you have the swipe fees, particularly with credit cards, that are a big pain point for all retailers. Retailers like cash. It is the least costly to accept. And also, about 20% of the population is unbanked, so they rely on cash. And that's an important consideration when you have ATMs. When we do these consumer surveys looking at how did you pay for gas, we never really climb much above 80% pay by plastic. There's always 20% that pay by cash, whether they're getting paid daily in cash or they prefer to pay cash or there is no other option. That's a huge importance when you look at ATMs and the number of unbanked. You tie that to your second point that you had about the ability to send cash via ATMs or money via ATMs. And I think it speaks to a pretty bright future for how ATMs will continue to be there when customers need access to their money.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that, Jeff. It's one of the things we see statistically, and there's always cash haters out there in the industry, and we find them popping up pretty regularly for different things. They popped up to a big extent during the pandemic, for example, as well. But cash as a percentage of all transactions is actually declining. However, cash usage is still growing because people, when they go to the ATM now, and this really kind of started with the pandemic, they're taking out more cash per transaction. So fewer transactions, but more cash per transaction. And as a result, we're still seeing that usage of cash and the total amount of cash being withdrawn at ATMs is still growing. And as you say, that's especially in retail locations, use of cash is pretty high, depending on what study you look at. Even overall transactions, last I've seen, are 40% or 40% plus of face-to-face retail transactions are still made in cash. That percentage is even higher if you're looking at transactions under $20 or so. So the unbanked, you mentioned, very, very good examples of why cash is important. It's very important to them. Sometimes it's their only method of payment. That's another initiative I can call attention to as well that ATMIA is working on, and that is the acceptance of cash by retailers. I know this isn't so much an issue with convenience stores, but in some other areas, restaurants and high-tone retail outlets, for example, don't like cash very often. And so we are behind some of the initiatives to make acceptance of cash in retail environments mandatory. Right now, it's a state by state, but there's a payments bill in Congress as well that that will be mandating that. We hope. So a lot of things going on there, and we again still see cash as very important, and that's cash advocacy is one of the primary advocacy efforts that we're involved in throughout the year.
So do you also have any stats in looking at, particularly with our industry or others that have ATMs, what do ATM customers do besides using the ATM? I can tell you from personal experience, particularly when the kids were younger, I would say I'm going to the convenience store, won't say the name, but they did have a product called Slurpee. And I'd say I'm going to the convenience store to get some money. There'd be two kids in my car before I could get in the car, and I'd get two Slurpees. That was part of the deal, and that was fun. Do you have stats in looking at what ATM customers do when they go to stores, what else they buy, or how often they might frequent stores, or even stories that relate to the strength of the ATM in drawing customers to buy things inside a store?
We actually don't have any studies specifically in that area. Some of our members have done cash studies, some of the bigger ATM deployers, for example, and gotten some of those numbers. And I guess the one that sticks in my mind is I think that putting an ATM in a retail store typically increases cash transactions something like 65%. I can't quote where that number came from. It might even have been one of your studies, Jeff, but that's pretty common, I think.
Well, when you look at swipe fees, that's a pretty attractive number to increase the cash sales. And obviously, if they're using cash, there's a high possibility they got them from the ATM. We have done studies. We ask consumers a couple times a year. We ask, okay, the last time you went and you bought gas, about half of the gas customers go inside the store, and then we ask, what did you do when you went inside the store? And consistently, we see about 1 in 8 say they use the ATM. So it is a strong way to get somebody inside the store. It tends to be next to another thing that people use often, which is the bathroom, and that's where people start their experience. They often use the bathroom, get cash out, and they turn around and they shop the store. So it is a good opportunity for stores to consider, how do you have the ATM there, and how do you grow it? In looking at some of the things you had talked about with initiatives, I remember 7-Eleven about 2 decades ago was looking at a new generation of ATMs that were similar to some of the ones that they had in Japan and Asia, which did much more what you were talking about. It was going to be the ATM of the future, where you could buy concert tickets, you could buy all kinds of things. It would be ability to dispense cash and also to accept cash. Are there things that are on the drawing board that we might see in the next few years that might take us back to this future that didn't quite get the same legs I think some people thought they might get?
Well, that really is the focus of the Next Gen Consortium for Next Gen ATMs that we're working on right now. It's very expensive to add functionality to an ATM, even if it's just a simple device that's in a convenience store. You have to go through a lot of processes. You've got to get approvals from the networks, and so it becomes very expensive for the manufacturers, for all the deployers to get that done. We think it should be something more like a tablet or a smartphone. So you go to the ATM app store and you download an application, and all of a sudden you're doing something that you weren't able to do before from the standpoint of applications and functionality. So it's a very difficult process. We're finding that trying to get all the right people together. We've got processors involved. We've got debit card networks involved in all this, but making that happen is proving to be a little more challenging than we thought it would be. The other piece of that too is for the owners of those machines. Right now, you've got to do a lot of updates, particularly if it's a Windows-based device like the financial institutions and some other retailers use. So there's a lot going on there, and we're trying to get to the point where it is a lot easier. There's a whole lot of things that different types of payments, for example, that you might be able to make that could be possible at the ATM. Right now, I think the big move seems to be with cash acceptance for payments, for deposits, and the recycling that's going on. There's one of the larger deployers that's deploying quite a few recycling machines now in retail stores. So that's a new trend I think that you'll see, which is kind of nice. It gives you some options to pick different denominations and so forth. When you're making your withdrawal.
So I want to turn a little bit and talk about ATMs are super convenient. They're in convenience stores. They're great for people who want access to their money. They're also, unfortunately, great for people who are bad people that want access to other people's money. And I know as there's been an increase in crime in retail overall, whether it's shoplifting or robbery or you name it, there's also been concerns with how do you address that with all things related to retail, including ATMs. There's in our industry, we've seen things smash and grabs where somebody may pull a car into a store and tie a chain around the ATM, drag it away, and maybe figure out how to get the money out or think they can get the money out. what are some of the trends related to crime that we're seeing in the industry, and what are some of the things that people are doing to address it?
Well, unfortunately, ATM crime in the last year has increased about 165% from our numbers, which is huge. And part of the issue here, from our perspective, and I think most would agree, is the fact that ATM crime is it's a misdemeanor in most states. I mean, that crime falls to the state level to to address the penalties, and so. It's an easy crime to commit. There's very little punishment. Folks who commit those crimes, criminals, usually are back on the street, very, very quickly. And contrary to what some people believe in the population, ATMs are almost never used for money laundering. It's a very inefficient process to do that. So what we find in looking at the activities of organized crime groups is that they're stealing money from the ATMs in many different ways. And then they launder that money through business and real estate transactions using mostly Western Union and MoneyGram. And, these are large, major organized crime groups. One of the largest is in Romania. They have field offices, if you want to look at it that way, in Los Angeles and New York City, and they're stealing millions and millions of dollars from ATMs every single month.
And how does that typically take place? Is that via what you might call skimming or shimming, where you're modifying the ATM itself, or is this the smash and grab type of operation?
Well, it varies a little bit, but in the neighborhood of 80 or 90% of the ATM crime that's taking place in the U.S. is a physical attack. And so that is either stealing the ATM itself as a whole device, or just stealing or getting in and opening up the vault in the ATM and stealing the cash from the ATM. So a lot of incidents with that. We don't see quite as much skimming as we used to here in the U.S. And most of what is going on is the smash and grab, the chain and hook. We're seeing that all across the board, and not just the smaller retailers, but even the banks are getting hit by these types of attacks.
It's astonishing that this is considered a misdemeanor. Given that there's cash in the system, and right. I don't know if there's a certain level that takes it to a felony, but it's not just the cash, it's the machine, it is the store, the physical disruption to the store, the damage to the store, certainly would merit that this should be something more than a misdemeanor. And is there anything that's being discussed in terms of how to possibly elevate the penalties for this to maybe have some more teeth into this? Is it a state by state thing, or is there something that others can do to maybe put more attention on this?
Well, right now it is exclusively a state by state issue. Last year, I think it was, Texas passed a law that does make ATM crimes a felony. And there was one other state this year that did, and trying to remember, it was Kansas or Missouri. I forget offhand. But it's something we're trying to, again, advocate for everywhere. There was a federal ATM crime bill that was introduced this year, and unfortunately, one of the sponsors was redistricted out of her position this year. So we're not sure if it's going to get reintroduced next year, but it is a bill. We are there talking to legislators about it, and hope that will, as I say, get reintroduced next year. But it would make ATM crime of all types a felony, and up to 20 years in prison plus fines. And we're very hopeful that passes. Right now, the only way that turns into a federal crime is if you start, stealing from ATMs across state lines. So basically, organized crime groups, they can go after them federally in many different ways, and they are. But it's a whole lot would be a whole lot better if we had ATM crime more like a bank robbery. You rob a bank, even if it's $10, you're going to jail for a long time, and that's just not true of the ATMs right now.
Well, we'll stay in touch on that. We'd love to see how that develops. One more question on crime. Do you have any resources for or advice for retailers with crime on the rise in throughout society, but specifically with ATMs? Are there things that you have for resources or recommendations that they might do to keep this type of crime away from their stores?
Well, there are some pretty good common sense things. I'm also president of the ATM Security Association, which is a sister organization that ATMIA acquired a few years ago. And we do that group publishes best practices for protecting yourself against various types of ATM attacks, physical skimming, other types of fraud, cyber attacks, things like that. For smash and grabs, for example, we find that bollards in front of the store are very helpful. That they do reduce the potential for that vehicle coming through the door, for example, or for those big picture windows often that are in the front. You want to keep the ATM away from windows. You don't want a direct or clear path from the ATM to doors and windows. It just makes it easier for the criminals. GPS devices we find are very very effective. They're not cheap because they have to be monitored, but quite often the authorities can get there quickly enough if they take the ATM to recover the funds and arrest the bad guys. So that's helpful. And lastly, I guess, common sense things, again, I guess closed circuit TV coverage in the area of the ATM from all different angles to just make it easier to try to identify those criminals. And, very often, as I say, they're part of an organized, group that's working that city, regardless of where they might reside, overnight.
Yeah, I was part of a panel a couple of years ago talking about all kinds of retail crime, and this one group in Nevada was testing something similar to what you were talking about with the GPS devices, where they had it where they would put it within a money that was in a bag of money that was in the cash register, and it was in areas that had some real issues with crime, and they found that in this test, the police were essentially at this place within minutes of the thieves getting there, and it was very effective. It as you said, it is more labor intensive. It requires coordination. It requires expenses, but those are some interesting things that can help address this, so that this is a temporary problem and not something that continues for an extended period of time. Don't want to end on the note about crime, so I want to end with something a little bit more top of mind over the last couple of years in terms of the first ATM. I've heard some things where the first ATM was at I think a chemical bank in Long Island in 1969. Then I talked to somebody in Britain, and he says, "No, of course that's ridiculous. The first one was here, and it was a year or two earlier." So, can you clarify for our global audience where that first ATM was? Is there a definitive statement, or is it one of those things where they're both kind of right?
Well, I guess depending on how you look at it, they could both be right. The very, very first ATM was in London from a bank. The very first one in the U.S. came shortly after that, and that was the Chemical Bank in New York. So they weren't, time-wise all that far apart, but we do give credit as our association to London as being the first deployer of that ATM back in the 1960s.
Okay, so I might have to change one of those backgrounders. That's interesting history. So we know that people can find you via multiple ways. In terms of the ATM Industry Association, go to www.atmia.org. ATMIA.com. And also, you mentioned some of the backgrounders related to security. Where can people find that?
The Security Association website is atmsecurityassociation.com, so all run together. And we have a lot of information resources there, as well as a database for tracking ATM crime globally.
Well, David, thank you for joining us today. ATMs are and will continue to be an important part of business for convenience stores. And I learned a little history at the end of this. So thank you for all of that today. And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.